Greetings! Anton here with a little bit different of an H3 devlog for you this week. We're going to be talking about a specific topic this week, specifically sound, partially informed by a bit of a side project that I am in the process of doing with Joe, who is the sound designer and composer that we've worked with a ton for H3. Let's adjust those. There we go. It's falling off the back of my head. So basically, and we're going to end up fulfilling a bit of a request in that a number of times folks have asked if they could see any of the shooty things in my own collection. And so we're going to be taking a look at a couple of those today, in specifically to talk about the sound that these devices make and how challenging it is to record them and to represent them, and thinking about sort of a bunch of the challenges in terms of how games handle firearm sound, and especially the challenges that are unique to VR. There we go. So basically where this whole sort of side project started was that I've been shooting an AR-15 a whole bunch recently, and it was in the process of really doing so and learning the platform more and learning how to build one, and really understanding the mechanics far deeper than I did earlier in this project, that I realized like how many unique sounds that it creates as a machine. And in the process of doing so was sort of thinking about simulation in H3, and basically if it was possible to capture a bunch of the other more sort of subtle sounds of the platform more accurately. And so basically we just did a recording session with Joe the other night. It's going to be the first of several for what is going to be an attempt to do a sort of a redo of the AR-15 platform sound in H3. And in doing so has just going through the whole process and comparing things that we've captured to sample packs that are out there, approaches that other games have taken, etc. It's been, I don't know, it's been a fascinating thing to do a deep dive into. And honestly, in talking with folks in the community, I think it's one of those things that most lay people who play games aren't aware of a lot of the challenges surrounding it. There's a lot of misconceptions about how Foley work is done, how recording real objects is done, what microphones can actually do and what they can't do. So I figured it'd be fun to show some things and talk about that a little bit on camera today. So to start off with, just from a safety standpoint, obviously this is a real firearm. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to confirm that it is empty, and that the chamber is empty, and that the magazine that we have here is also empty. Cool. Actually, we can just put this over here. So where I want to actually start is to sort of talk about there's actually one sound that this makes that is easily the hardest thing to capture and represent exactly how it sounds in real life. And if you haven't ever operated one of these, you might not know this, but the sound of just the bolt dropping is so much louder than you expect it to be, and it has a whole bunch of sort of characters to it that are very difficult to capture and reproduce. It has a wonderful sort of ring to it, especially based upon how you're holding it, how tightly. Like if you're really gripping and holding against your body, a lot of that is damped, but if you're sort of holding it more loosely, I'll go ahead and do that now into the mic. So this is your sound check. Some of these sounds that are going to be coming through here. I've got a compressor on here, but this is still probably going to clip a little bit. So for the first one of these, don't have your, don't have your volume up too loud, and you can maybe go back and adjust and replay based on that. So I'm going to turn this mic down. So this is the sound that has been the most difficult to capture well, and we'll see actually how this ends up coming through in the recording. Probably not as perfect as it could be, but So that, the sound of the bolt dropping, especially, and once again, I won't know until I watch this video later if the ring even comes through. That was a little bit better. So yeah, so there is so much going on in that sound, and it's part of the reason why it's difficult to capture, and why it's difficult in the process of capturing it to try to get it to match the received experience of a person holding the object. We have the bolt actually coming into battery and compressing, and all of that sort of metal contact that is happening there. We have the fact that we have the carrier group coming out of the buffer tube here, and this there's a big spring. If you've never fired an AR-15 before, one of the funniest discoveries you make the first time you use active hearing protection, i.e. a pair of cans that have a microphone on them, is that there is a giant spring in here, and it makes a sprungy sound every single time you fire, which is hilarious. Let's see if we can get that to come through in the mic. It's not really coming. I'm going to try one more time. Maybe all the way at the back. There, we could hear a little more of the blump. But when you've actually got hearing protection on, you can hear the sort of reverb or the sort of second resonance of that even more. It is a scream. So that is an incredibly difficult sound to capture. One of the first things we did when we started the recording session for doing this stuff is we compared a whole bunch of different mics. And the thing that's weird is that most microphones capture intense and hard sounds like you get from a bolt dropping way, way, way more tinnily than you and I actually hear them. And part of that has to do with the amount of air that's being moved, and just the fact that a microphone does not work the same way as your ears. It's a fundamentally different piece of hardware, and it converges with your received experience of what you're hearing with certain things. Certainly it does with voices, significantly more with sharp sounds that have a whole bunch of sort of dynamic range, where there's something really loud happening and something really quiet happening in close proximity to one another. But yeah, going through the whole process, there was a whole bunch of, essentially it wasn't until I actually sat down and tried to enumerate in a total way all of the sounds this makes that I realized just how many of them I had been missing, and how many sort of great little sounds there were in this. Like just the, the difference between, let's aim this back down here, between the sound of the dust cover being closed and the sound of the dust cover being opened. Let's see if we can capture this. Gotta pull the charging handle just right. There we go. There's your AR-15 ASMR today. Isn't that a delightful little sound? Indeed, as well, with the sort of bolt, the actual bolt's movement, recognizing that there's really distinct sounds between the sort of disengagement from battery to the sound, this distinct sound at the end of travel. Let's back this up here. And of course, that then brings in the other sort of challenge when you are attempting to record these things, is that many of these sounds are simultaneously a sound that you would call mechanics, in that they are about a piece hitting another piece, or scraping along it, or what have you, but that they are also a property of handling, and so they are going to come across differently based upon how you perform them. Even something like, let's say if we lock our bolt to the rear, like so. It's inverted video, I never know which direction. So we now have our charging handle, which is able to move freely. How do we choose to record this? Do we record it independently in such a way that we try to move the catch here as little as possible for it to drop in and out, so we get sounds like this? Or do we actually hold that catch down as much as possible to get the sound independently of those extra little hits, so we just get the sliding sound? And then, from an authorial standpoint, how do we choose to recombine those things? In this way, a video game that isn't a VR game has a significantly easier task because, you know, if your weapon is being reloaded, or really any sort of action that you're performing with a firearm in a flat game, in a non-VR game, it's an animation. I'm hitting a key, I'm hitting R, and a whole sequences of events is playing out. An animation can be synced to sound. They can really amplify each other, and it plays out roughly the same way each and every time. It isn't a simulation with a set of events. It's an, as I said, it's an animation. And so you can get away with many things that suddenly, when the user can do all sorts of bizarre independent things, you can't. And obviously right now, guns in H3, there are tons of actions that you can perform with the bolt handles, with the manually operable bolts, with magazines, where there aren't distinct and separate sounds because, well, the handling libraries would be absolutely enormous in that case. But as this is a project that sort of began with like, what is it possible to simulate? I think I've sort of come around back full circle again, and I'm really interested again in sort of pushing forward some aspects of simulation detail. And I think to be able to have that detail be interesting, it needs to have feedback. In this case, sound. So yeah, so let me look at my little list here. So yeah, one of the other things that we're, you know, going to be trying to capture as well as sort of like button engagement and disengagement, even when it's minor. So if you go to press the, one of the things I'm going to put in is when you're pressing the mag release button, actually having, hopefully this actually comes through. Having discrete sounds for pushing and releasing. Here's the bolt catch. Oh wait, that doesn't work if we, oops. There we go. There's your bolt catch coming in and out. And then one of the other sort of challenges, once again, in recording this stuff is the fact that many of these sounds are different based upon whether there's a magazine loaded or not, and whether that magazine is empty or full or has rounds in it. In this case, for recording, we're using snap caps. So this is just a fake metal bullet with a little bit of, I think it's polymer in the back that prevents you from damaging your firing pin. But if we put that in, here's a great sound. That could have been better. And here's the magazines are an incredible example of having differences in how they're performed. I know some games have the magazine sounds like someone's practically shaking it as they're taking out. It's this like so, where someone has performed all of these extra sort of clicks and clacks, or they've been added in the editing process, etc. versus so yeah. But even say the bolt dropping, which in this case we're gonna chamber one of our fake rounds in the process, we should pick up a whole bunch of rattle and ring from the magazine from doing this. I don't know how much they came across. Dump our fake round out. Another great sound as it rolls away, and hopefully I don't trip on it later. So yeah, so that has been what I have been exploring with Joe. And so a component of it is obviously trying to do recordings, and in the case of in the case of this experiment, trying to match their character, their sort of tenor, and their apparent volume to the real thing. And then, of course, trying to see if, once those are all plugged into a simulation, is that interesting? Does it come across? Is it too discordant with other existing sounds that may have been sort of mixed and authored with a slightly more video gamey or a more understated approach? I'm going to also bring out one that is going to be on the list as well. This is one of my babies. This is a Chilean Mauser 1895, and this makes some of the most delightful sounds possible, and I'm going to share them with you now. Here is your over a century old bolt action ASMR. So we're going to pull this open. Going to put it on half safe here. Close this. This one is cock on close, and so it's, especially with my programmer noodle arms, I struggle with it. But here we can get the bolt to freely move now. What a wonderful mechanism. Delightful. Just delightful. And an incredibly loud hammer drop. Yup, that clipped. So yeah, this is going to be essentially a little bit of a side project collab with Joe, sort of going through and doing a whole bunch of recordings of things in my collection. And in the case of how it's going to make its way into the game, the AR-15 stuff is definitely going to make it in. As it, honestly, the more time I spent shooting it, the more I sort of developed a pet peeve for how wrong the bolt sounds were. And I know that has bothered a whole bunch of you folks as well. So that is going to be, I don't know if I would call it fixed. It's hard to talk about this stuff because one of the things that has always been, how to put it, a little frustrating working on H3 in regards to sound especially, is that people love to throw around the word realistic in regards to gunshots, which is, how to put it, there's no such thing as a realistic gunshot in a game, simply because the sound pressures exceed what you are capable of hearing without hearing damage. So anytime someone says, oh, this doesn't sound real, there's this question of like, well, relative to what and in what context? This doesn't sound like, it sounds like when you have hearing protection in what sort of sonic environment? After how much time spent shooting, and as such a nerd to those sorts of sound pressures. So I think in regards to gunshots, it's no matter how you mix things, surely there are ways to do it more Hollywood or more restrained or maybe simulatory. It's always the case that it is a compositional and curatorial decision. It is an artist or a group of artists making a series of decisions to present an interpretation of what something sounds like. And so I think I always like bringing this up just because, I don't know. It isn't even that games tend to market sound based on realism, but I think people get their sort of notions in their head of sort of what a real gun sounds like or what a realistic gun should sound like in games, and it's always important just to remember just how incredibly subjective that all is. Anywho, well, I hope this has been an interesting little aside, a devlog that is a little bit more about a specific topic area. I hope I haven't bored you to tears with my clicks and clacks and rambles. But yeah, so hopefully this also gets you excited. As I said, I don't have an ETA for when this is going to go in. It's the sort of thing that Joe and I are sort of simultaneously trying to produce and design a whole sample pack that sort of takes this approach more seriously. Because the reality is, like, if you look at even the best libraries online, for firearm stuff. They're clearly made for movies instead of games. A lot more effort is paid to recording the shots, which makes sense to a certain degree. That is the harder thing to do. It's very, very difficult to capture a gunshot from many different aspects with many different mics in a way that can be used to mix something good and interesting. But I can't help but feel as though the actual sort of like Foley and mechanics recording that is on pretty much all of the libraries out there is a bit of an afterthought. It doesn't seem like anyone has sat down and tried to really be like record in as much isolation as possible all of the machinery of the weapon. And obviously, because unless you're a kook making a VR game with super simulated firearms, that might not actually be necessary. But it is, I don't know, it's a project that is making me sort of like feeding back insight, and even like I would have done X or Y thing differently sorts of things for the actual firearm simulation in game, and I'm sure will inform future projects of mine as well. Anywho, with that, I will leave you all for this week. Next weekend, we should have ourselves our next big patch. I should hopefully have the last of the explosives migrated over to the new system, as well as a couple platform-specific patches. Anyone who's seen me complain on Twitter knows that I'm working on something to help fix trigger response on the Quest. So hopefully that should help with that. So yeah, and that's my lunch. You just heard the knock at the door. So I'm going to sign off, and I'll see y'all folks all next week. Peace.